The schoolhouse door rattled against its hinges as another gust tore across the Wyoming plains, carrying with it the bitter promise of an early winter. Abigail Cross stood at the window, watching the last of her students disappear into the gathering dusk, their small figures swallowed by the endless gray expanse. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman of 33 with sharp eyes and sharper cheekbones, hair pulled back in a severe knot that spoke more of practicality than vanity. She didn't look like someone who'd once believed in romance. That girl had died 7 years ago, buried alongside dreams of a Boston wedding and a husband who'd chosen his mother's approval over his bride's heart. "Miss Cross?" The voice startled her. She turned to find Cole Maddox filling the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking what little light remained. He didn't remove his hat, a breach of etiquette that would have scandalized the women's auxiliary, but somehow suited him. Everything about Cole Maddox was rough-hewn and unpolished, the scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the permanent squint from years of staring into harsh sun, the hands that looked like they could snap fence posts as easily as kindling. "School's closed, Mr. Maddox." Abigail turned back to her desk, gathering the slates she'd been grading. "If you're here about Thomas's arithmetic scores, I'm not here about my nephew." Something in his tone made her pause. Cole Maddox wasn't a man given to social calls. In the 2 years since she'd arrived in Sweetwater, she could count on one hand the number of words they'd exchanged. He was a fixture at the edge of town life, present at barn raisings and cattle auctions, but always separate, always watching with those storm-colored eyes that gave away nothing. "Then what brings you here at this hour?" She kept her voice level, professional. Men like Cole Maddox didn't make house calls, or schoolhouse calls, for pleasant reasons. He stepped inside, closing the door against the wind. The schoolhouse suddenly felt smaller. "I need to speak with you, privately." "We are private." "I mean, about a matter of—" He stopped, seemed to wrestle with the words. "A business proposition." Abigail set down her papers slowly. "Mr. Maddox, if this is about expanding the school curriculum or funding for new textbooks, it's about marriage." The word dropped between them like a stone down a well. Abigail's hands went still on the desk. Around them, the schoolhouse creaked and settled, the wood contracting in the cooling air. "I beg your pardon?" Cole removed his hat finally, turning it in his hands. His knuckles were scarred, she noticed. Working hands. "I'm asking you to marry me." "Have you been drinking, Mr. Maddox?" Stone sober. He met her gaze directly, and she saw he was serious, deadly serious. "I know how it sounds. We barely know each other. But I've thought this through, and I believe it's a practical solution for both of us." Abigail felt a laugh building in her chest, the kind that bordered on hysteria. A practical solution. To what exactly? To the fact that winter's coming 6 weeks early, and you're living alone in that boarding house with a roof that won't hold past November. To the fact that Mrs. Henderson's already talking about converting your room to storage because she needs the income from male boarders who can pay double. To the fact that— He paused. "To the fact that you're running out of options, Miss Cross. Same as me." The laugh died. Abigail's fingers tightened on the edge of her desk. "How dare you?" "I dare because it's true." He didn't raise his voice, but something in it cut through her indignation. "I'm not here to insult you. I'm here because I see things clearly, and what I see is two people who could help each other survive what's coming." Survive. The word tasted bitter. "Is that what you think marriage is? Survival? Out here?" Cole gestured toward the window, toward the endless prairie beyond. "Yes, that's exactly what it is." Abigail turned away from him, her mind racing. She wanted to throw him out, to tell him his proposal was insulting and absurd, and everything her pride demanded she reject. But even as the anger rose, another part of her, the practical, calculating part that had kept her alive and independent for 7 years, was already doing the arithmetic. Mrs. Henderson had raised her rent twice in 6 months. The school board's budget was stretched thin. There were rumors of salary cuts. Winter supplies cost money she didn't have. And the boarding house roof, Cole was right about that. She'd been lying awake during storms, listening to the drip spreading across her ceiling, knowing that when the real snows came— "What exactly are you proposing?" She kept her back to him, staring out at the darkening plains. "A marriage of convenience, practical arrangement. You'd have a home, security, warmth through the winter. I'd have—" He paused. I'd have what I need, which is stability, respectability, someone to help manage the house. Another pause. And someone to keep Victor Hale's lawyers from circling my property like buzzards. Now they were getting to the truth. Abigail turned back to face him. Victor Hale, the cattle baron who's been buying up every ranch between here and Cheyenne, the same. He's been after my land for 2 years, made offers, threats, sent his lawyers sniffing around for any excuse to claim I've abandoned the property or can't maintain it properly. Having a wife, an established household, it would strengthen my legal position considerably. So I'm to be a legal strategy. How romantic. Cole's jaw tightened. I never said anything about romance, Miss Cross. I'm talking about a business arrangement between two adults who understand how the world works. The world? Abigail crossed her arms. You mean the world where women are property to be bartered and traded for land rights? I mean the world where women freeze to death in boarding houses with leaking roofs, and men lose everything they've built because they don't have wives to prove they're civilized enough to deserve property rights. His voice had an edge now. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not even asking you to particularly like me. I'm asking you to be practical. Practical. She tested the word again. And what would this practical marriage look like, Mr. Maddox? Separate bedrooms. Mutual respect. You'd continue teaching if you wanted. I wouldn't stop you. You'd run the household as you saw fit. I'd provide for you, protect you, and never raise a hand to you. He met her eyes. And when winter passes, if you want to leave, I won't stop you. I'll even pay for your passage anywhere you want to go. How generous. It's honest. Cole stepped closer, and she caught the smell of leather and pine smoke. Miss Cross? Abigail? I know I'm not offering you anything like what you probably dreamed of when you were young. I know I'm just a rough rancher with more debts than prospects and a face that looks like I've been in too many fights. You have been in too many fights? Exactly my point. I'm not a prize. But I'm offering you something real, safety, shelter, and the freedom to make your own choices. That's more than most women get out here. Abigail wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she had other options, that she didn't need rescuing. But the wind rattled the window again, and she thought of her room at the boarding house, thought of the coins she counted every Sunday, thought of the way Mrs. Henderson had looked at her last week with calculation in her eyes. Why me? The question came out quieter than she intended. There are younger women, prettier women, women who'd jump at the chance to marry a landowner. Cole was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost its hard edge. Because you're sensible, because you read books and think before you speak, because I've watched you handle a classroom full of wild children with patience and firmness, and I respect that because, he stopped, seemed to choose his words carefully, because you're alone too. And you understand what that cost. Something in those words hit deeper than Abigail expected. She turned back to the window, watching her reflection merge with the darkness outside. 7 years. 7 years of carefully constructed independence. 7 years of telling herself she didn't need anyone, that she was better off alone. 7 years of watching couples walk past the schoolhouse hand in hand while she graded papers by candlelight in a room that smelled of damp and mildew. I need time to think. Winter's not going to wait for you to decide, Miss Cross. I said I need time. She turned, and something in her expression made him step back. This is my life we're discussing, Mr. Maddox. My future. I won't be rushed into a decision because of bad weather and your property disputes. Cole nodded slowly. Fair enough. How long? 3 days. 2. Hale's lawyers are filing new papers on Friday. I need to be able to tell them I have a wife. Then I suggest you find someone else, because I need 3 days. They stared at each other across the small schoolhouse, and Abigail saw something shift in Cole's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. He put his hat back on. 3 days, then. I'll come back Thursday evening for your answer. He was at the door when she spoke again. Mr. Maddox? If I agreed, and I'm not saying I will, but if I did, what would you expect from me? Truly. He turned back, silhouetted against the last light. Honesty, loyalty, someone who won't run when things get hard. A pause. And maybe someone who understands that sometimes the best we can do is survive together instead of dying alone. Then he was gone. leaving Abigail standing in the empty schoolhouse with a proposal that felt less like a question and more like a mirror held up to every fear she'd been trying to ignore. The walk back to the boarding house took 15 minutes, but Abigail barely noticed the cold. Her mind kept replaying Cole's words, turning them over like puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit the picture she'd built of her life. Mrs. Henderson was in the parlor when Abigail entered, darning socks by lamplight. She looked up with that assessing expression Abigail had come to dread. "You're late, Miss Cross. Supper's already cleared." "I had work to finish at the school." Mrs. Henderson's needle moved in sharp, efficient jabs. "Speaking of which, I'll need next month's rent by the 1st. No extensions this time." "Of course." Abigail started toward the stairs. "And Miss Cross? I've had inquiries from 2 railroad men looking for rooms. Good paying work, steady income. I'll need to know your plans going forward." The words were casual, but the meaning was clear. Make way for more profitable tenants. Abigail's hand tightened on the banister. "I understand, Mrs. Henderson." In her room, small, cold, the ceiling stained dark where water had leaked through, Abigail lit her single candle and sat on the narrow bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear Mr. Peterson coughing in the next room, the same wet hack he'd had for months. Below, Mrs. Henderson's voice rose in complaint about something. This was her life. This room, this uncertainty, this constant calculation of pennies and pride. She pulled out the tin box she kept under her bed, counted the money inside. Enough for 2 months' rent, maybe 3 if she stretched. Enough for winter supplies if she was careful. Not enough for both. Not enough to be certain. The words echoed in her mind. Sometimes the best we can do is survive together instead of dying alone. Abigail pressed her hands to her face. When had she become this person? When had survival become the highest aspiration she could imagine? She knew the answer. It had been 7 years ago, standing in a Boston parlor while her former fiancé, explained that his mother simply couldn't accept a bride from such modest circumstances, that he hoped she'd understand, that she'd always hold a special place in his heart. She'd understood perfectly. She'd understood that love was a luxury, and she couldn't afford luxuries, so she'd stopped believing in them. And now Cole Maddox was offering her exactly what she'd told herself she wanted: security without sentiment, shelter without strings, a practical arrangement for practical people. So why did the thought of it make her chest tight? A knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Sarah Chen, the only other unmarried woman in the boarding house, holding a cup of tea. "Thought you might want this. You looked frozen through when you came in." Abigail took the cup gratefully. Sarah was maybe 25, pretty in a quiet way, working as a seamstress to support herself after her parents died in a fire. They'd formed an unspoken alliance, 2 women alone in a world that didn't quite know what to do with them. "Thank you." Sarah lingered in the doorway. "You all right? You seem distracted." For a moment, Abigail considered telling her, considered saying the words out loud. "A man proposed to me." Not a real proposal, just a business arrangement. Should I say yes? But the words stuck. Saying them would make it real, and Abigail wasn't ready for real yet. "Just tired. Long day with the children." Sarah nodded, but her eyes said she didn't quite believe it. "Well, if you ever need to talk." She trailed off, squeezed Abigail's hand briefly, and left. Abigail closed the door and sipped the tea. It was too hot, scalding her tongue, but she welcomed the sharp sensation. It felt real in a way the last hour hadn't. She thought about Cole Maddox's ranch. She'd never been there, but she'd heard others talk about it. Solid house, good land, water rights that made it valuable. Isolated, though, miles from town, cut off completely when the snows came. Isolated. The word settled heavy in her thoughts. She was already isolated here in town, surrounded by people. Would it be worse or better to be isolated with someone else? Someone who understands that sometimes the best we can do is survive together. The tea grew cold in her hands as night deepened outside her window. In the distance, she could hear cattle lowing, the sound carrying across the empty spaces between buildings. Soon, those spaces would be filled with snow, and Sweetwater would shrink into itself. Everyone huddled close to their fires, waiting for spring. Everyone except those who didn't have fires to huddle beside. Abigail set down the cup and pulled out paper and pen. She began making lists, She always thought better when she could see things written down. 2 columns. Reasons to accept, reasons to refuse. Reasons to accept. Financial security, proper home. Protection from Hale's influence. He'd made uncomfortable comments at the last town meeting. Escape from boarding house. Maintain teaching position. Clear exit clause after winter. Reasons to refuse. Marriage to a stranger. Isolated location. Unknown temperament. Those scars didn't come from nowhere. Loss of independence, social judgment, risk of... She stopped. Risk of what? Disappointment? She'd already survived that. Heartbreak? You couldn't break what you didn't give away. But there was another risk, one she didn't want to write down. The risk of discovering she was more lonely than she'd admitted. The risk that sharing a house with someone, even someone she barely knew, might reveal exactly how empty her self-sufficient life had become. The pen hovered over the paper. Finally, she wrote, "Risk of wanting more than survival." The next morning dawned gray and bitter. Abigail taught her classes mechanically, her mind only half present. The children noticed, they always noticed, and took advantage, their behavior sliding toward chaos until she snapped at Tommy Henderson with an edge that made the boy's eyes water. She apologized immediately, but the damage was done. The classroom fell into an uncomfortable silence, and Abigail felt the weight of 24 young eyes watching her, seeing something wrong. During lunch break, she stood outside, needing air despite the cold. That's when she saw him. Victor Hale rode through town with an entourage, 4 men on horseback, dressed too well to be regular ranch hands. Hale himself was handsome in a polished way that Cole Maddox decidedly wasn't. Clean-shaven, expensive coat, the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. He tipped his hat to Abigail as he passed. "Miss Cross, lovely day, isn't it?" It absolutely wasn't, and they both knew it. Abigail nodded politely, watching as Hale's group stopped at the land office. Through the window, she could see papers being spread across the desk, serious conversations happening. "That's the 3rd time this week he's been in there." Abigail turned to find Reverend Michaels standing beside her. The minister was one of the few people in town she genuinely respected, honest, kind, without the usual frontier hardness. "Land deals?" she asked. "Always land deals with Hale. He's buying up everything he can, and what he can't buy, he finds ways to claim anyway. Legal ways, mostly, but..." The Reverend paused. "Let's just say his lawyers are very creative. I've heard he's been targeting the Maddox Ranch. Among others. Cole's been stubborn about selling, which makes Hale even more determined. It's become personal for both of them." The Reverend looked at her curiously. "Why do you ask?" Abigail realized her mistake too late. "Just town gossip. You know how it is." But the Reverend's expression had shifted, understanding dawning. "Cole came to see me yesterday. Asked about marriage licenses, what the requirements were." Her face must have given something away because the Reverend's eyes widened slightly. "Miss Cross, did Cole Maddox propose to you?" "Reverend, I really can't." "That stubborn fool." But there was affection in the words, not judgment. "I've known Cole since he was a boy. He's rough around the edges, but he's a good man. Honest, loyal, the kind who'd rather break than bend his principles." "Even if those principles involve proposing marriage to a virtual stranger?" The Reverend smiled. "Especially then. Cole doesn't do things halfway. If he asked you, he's thought it through. He sees something in you worth trusting his future to. Or he sees a convenient solution to a legal problem. Maybe both. Would that be so terrible?" The question caught Abigail off guard. She'd been so focused on the practical aspects, the calculating coldness of Cole's proposal, that she hadn't considered it might contain a compliment, that choosing her, sensible, stubborn, alone, might mean something. "I don't know what it would be," she admitted quietly. The Reverend was quiet for a moment, watching Hale's men through the land office window. "I'll tell you something about Cole that most people don't know. His father died 5 years ago, thrown from a horse, everyone said, but Cole always suspected it wasn't an accident, that someone spooked that horse deliberately. Hale? Cole could never prove it, but after his father died, the legal challenges started. Claims about boundary disputes, water rights, old debts that mysteriously appeared. Cole's been fighting alone all this time, and it's worn him down." The Reverend turned to her. "Maybe he is looking for a practical solution. But maybe he's also just tired of fighting alone. Sometimes those are the same thing. The school bell rang, calling the children back. Abigail watched them stream toward the building, their voices carrying on the cold air. "Does it get easier?" she asked suddenly. "Being alone? Does it stop mattering eventually?" The Reverend's expression softened. "No, Miss Cross. It gets harder. That's why we keep reaching for connection, even when we know it might hurt us." That evening, Abigail did something she rarely allowed herself. She took a walk toward Cole Maddox's ranch. Not all the way, she wouldn't go that far uninvited, but far enough to see it in the distance. The house sat on a rise, solid and square against the vast sky. Smoke rose from the chimney. Fences stretched in clean lines. Cattle dotted the fields, dark shapes against the darkening grass. It looked established, real, permanent in a way nothing in Abigail's life had felt for years. She stood at the property line, hands shoved deep in her pockets against the cold, and tried to imagine herself there. Tried to picture waking up in that house, cooking in that kitchen, sitting by that fire. Tried to imagine Cole Maddox across the table from her, morning after morning. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, it was just uncertain. Neither good nor bad, just unknown. "You planning to stand there all night?" Abigail jumped. Cole had approached from the side, leading a horse. In the fading light, he looked even rougher than she remembered. Several days' stubble, clothes dusty from work, that scar across his eyebrow more pronounced. "I was just—" She stopped, caught. "I wanted to see it. The ranch." "And?" "It's substantial. That's one word for it." He gestured toward the house. "Want a proper look?" Every instinct told her to refuse, to maintain boundaries, to keep this transaction purely theoretical until she'd made her decision. But her feet were already moving, following Cole up the rise toward the house. The inside was simpler than she expected, clean but spare. A main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with a cast-iron stove, visible doorways leading to what must be bedrooms. No decorations, no softness, just function. "It's not much," Cole said, watching her take it in. "I'm not much for fancy things." "It's warm." The words came out before she could stop them, and she realized they were true. After months in the drafty boarding house, the solid warmth of the room felt like luxury. Cole moved to the stove, adding wood to the fire already burning there. "Coffee? It's probably terrible, but it's hot. Please." They sat at the table, rough-hewn pine, scarred from use, and Abigail wrapped her hands around the tin cup he gave her. The coffee was indeed terrible, bitter and strong enough to strip paint, but she drank it anyway. "Why did you really come?" Cole asked finally. "I told you. I wanted to see—" "No, I mean, why did you come back to the frontier at all? You're educated, well-spoken. You could have stayed east, taught in some comfortable school with real walls and heating systems." Abigail stared into her coffee, seeing her own reflection waver in the dark liquid. "The man I was engaged to, the one who changed his mind, he was from a good Boston family. Important family. After he broke things off, people talked, doors closed. Teaching positions I'd been promised suddenly weren't available." She looked up at Cole. "So I came where no one knew my story, where no one cared about my pedigree or my past, where you could start over, where I could be alone on my own terms instead of everyone else's." Cole nodded slowly. "I get that. After my father died, people in town looked at me different, some with pity, some with suspicion, like maybe I'd done something to cause it, like maybe I deserved to lose everything he'd built." "Did you? Deserve it?" He met her eyes. "I don't know. I was angry a lot back then, still am sometimes. My father wasn't perfect. He drank too much, made enemies he didn't need to make. But he was mine, and someone took him from me. If that makes me deserving of punishment—" He shrugged. "You really think someone killed him? I know someone did. I just can't prove it. And without proof, I'm just the angry son of a drunk rancher, making wild accusations at respectable men like Victor Hale." They sat in silence, the fire crackling. Outside, night had fallen completely. Abigail realized with a start that she should leave, that being here alone with Cole was improper, that Mrs. Henderson would have questions. But she didn't move. "You said I could leave after winter," she said quietly. "Did you mean that?" "I don't say things I don't mean." "Why would you agree to that?" What's to stop me from taking advantage, using your home for a few months, then disappearing? Cole was quiet for a long moment. Because I think you're too honest for that. And because he stopped, seemed to wrestle with something. Because I'd rather have you here for a season, knowing it's temporary, than not have you here at all. That's the truth. The admission hung between them, more vulnerable than anything else he'd said. Abigail felt something shift in her chest. Not attraction exactly, but recognition. Cole Maddox, for all his rough exterior and pragmatic proposals, was as lonely as she was. Maybe more so. She stood, suddenly needing distance. I should go. It's late. Cole stood too. I'll ride you back. That's not necessary. It's full dark and there are animals. I'll ride you back. It wasn't a suggestion. 20 minutes later, Abigail sat in front of Cole on his horse, acutely aware of his presence behind her, the way his arms bracketed her on either side as he held the reins. She kept her spine straight, maintaining inches of space between them, but she could feel his warmth, smell the smoke and leather scent of him. When they reached the boarding house, he helped her down. His hands on her waist were brief, impersonal, but Abigail felt the strength in them. Thursday, he said. I'll need your answer Thursday. I know. She watched him ride away, disappearing into the darkness, and stood shivering on the porch long after the sound of hoofbeats faded. Inside, Mrs. Henderson was waiting, arms crossed. It's past 9, Miss Cross. I apologize. I was with Cole Maddox. Yes, I saw. People will talk. Let them. The words came out harder than Abigail intended, and Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose. But Abigail was past caring. She climbed the stairs to her cold room, her leaking ceiling, her careful loneliness, and lay in bed staring at the dark. 2 more days. 2 more days to decide if she was brave enough or desperate enough to bet her future on a stranger's promise of survival. Thursday arrived too quickly and not quickly enough. Abigail spent the intervening days in a state of distraction that made teaching nearly impossible. She snapped at students for minor infractions, lost her place during reading lessons, and twice had to be reminded by young Emma Thornton that she'd already called morning attendance. Are you feeling poorly, Miss Cross? Emma asked with the blunt concern of a 9-year-old. You look like my ma did before she had the baby, all pale and distracted-like. I'm perfectly well, Emma. Please return to your multiplication tables. But she wasn't well. She was caught in a mental loop of her own making, turning the same questions over and over until they'd worn grooves in her thoughts. What kind of woman agreed to marry a stranger? What kind of fool turned down security because it wasn't wrapped in poetry and promises? What kind of coward chose survival over principles? And underneath all of it, the question she didn't want to examine too closely. What kind of life was she living if the thought of leaving it caused more relief than regret? By Wednesday evening, Sarah Chen cornered her in the boarding house hallway. All right, what's going on? You've been acting strange for days. Abigail tried to sidestep. I don't know what you mean. You were staring at your dinner plate for 10 minutes straight tonight. The potatoes could have grown eyes and done a dance, and you wouldn't have noticed. Sarah crossed her arms. Is it money? Because if you need to borrow, it's not money. The words came out sharper than intended. Abigail softened her voice. I'm sorry. It's just complicated. Complicated how? Abigail looked at her friend. This young woman who'd also chosen independence over convention, who understood what it cost to stand alone. Maybe Sarah would understand this too. If someone offered you security, Abigail said slowly, but it meant giving up your freedom to choose your own path, would you take it? Sarah's expression shifted. That's not a hypothetical question, is it? No. Cole Maddox. It wasn't a question. Sarah had always been perceptive. I heard he rode you home the other night. Mrs. Henderson made sure everyone heard about it. Of course she did. They stood in the dim hallway, the smell of boiled cabbage and mildew surrounding them. Sarah reached out, squeezed Abigail's hand. I can't tell you what to do, but I'll say this. Freedom's not worth much if you freeze to death clutching it, and being alone isn't the same as being independent. Sometimes it's just alone. The words stayed with Abigail through the night, through Thursday's lessons, through the afternoon as she watched the clock tick toward the moment Cole would arrive for her answer. When the last student finally left, Abigail stood at the window watching the sky. Heavy clouds had moved in overnight, the kind that promised snow. The air had that peculiar stillness that came before winter storms, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The door opened. She didn't need to turn to know it was Cole. She'd started to recognize his footsteps, the particular way he moved through space. "Miss Cross?" She turned. He looked different today. Cleaned up, wearing what must be his best shirt, his hair still damp from washing. The effort touched something in her chest. "Mr. Maddox." They stood there, facing each other across the schoolroom, and Abigail was suddenly struck by how absurd this all was. Two people negotiating a marriage like it was a cattle transaction. Two lonely souls trying to solve loneliness with paperwork and pragmatism. "I have your answer," she said. Cole's expression didn't change, but she saw his shoulders tense. "I'm listening." "I have conditions." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise maybe, or respect. "Go on." "I keep teaching. No arguments, no suggestions that a wife shouldn't work. My income remains mine to manage." "Agreed." "I want my own room, with a lock on the door, and I want your word that lock will be respected." "You have it. If I choose to leave after winter, you'll provide transportation to whichever city I name and enough money to establish myself there. No questions, no guilt, no attempts to change my mind." Cole nodded slowly. "Anything else?" "Yes." Abigail lifted her chin. "I want honesty. Complete honesty. If you're in danger, I need to know. If Hale makes threats, I need to know. Don't protect me by keeping me ignorant. I'm agreeing to stand beside you. That means I deserve to know what I'm standing against." "Fair enough." Cole took a step closer. "My turn for conditions." "All right. I want loyalty. If you're my wife, even in name only, you're my partner. That means we don't undermine each other, especially not in public. We present a united front." "Agreed." "I want honesty from you too. If something's wrong, if you're unhappy, if you're planning to leave, tell me. Don't just disappear one morning." "I won't. And I want—" He paused, seemed to wrestle with the words. "I want you to give it a real chance. Not just survive the winter and count down days. Actually try to build something, even if it's just a working partnership. Can you do that?" Abigail studied his face. There was vulnerability there, carefully hidden but present. Cole Maddox wasn't just looking for a legal convenience. He was looking for something more, even if he wouldn't name it. "I can try," she said quietly. "Then we have an agreement?" "We have an agreement." Cole crossed the room, extended his hand. Abigail took it, and they shook like business partners sealing a deal. His grip was firm, warm, his palm calloused from work. It should have felt impersonal, transactional. Instead, it felt like stepping off a cliff with no idea where she'd land. "I'll arrange things with Reverend Michaels," Cole said. "We can marry Saturday if that suits you. Small ceremony, just witnesses." "That's fine. You'll need to give notice at the boarding house." "I'll tell Mrs. Henderson tonight." They stood there, hands still clasped, and Abigail realized neither of them knew quite how to let go. Finally, Cole released her, stepped back. "There's one more thing you should know," he said, "about the situation with Hale. Tell me. It's worse than I let on. He's not just trying to buy my land, he's trying to prove I acquired it illegally. Claims my father stole it from the original owner 40 years ago, that the deed was never properly transferred. It's nonsense, but his lawyers have manufactured enough doubt that the territorial judge is considering a hearing. Can you prove your father's ownership was legitimate? That's the problem. Most of the original documents were lost in a fire 20 years ago. All I have are tax records and witness statements. Hale has fancy lawyers and forged papers that look more official than my actual claim." Abigail felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold room. "So this marriage, it's not just about respectability. It's about survival." "Yes." Cole met her eyes. "I won't lie to you about that. Hale's coming for everything I have, and he won't stop until he gets it, or I find a way to stop him. By marrying me, you're putting yourself in his crosshairs too." "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I didn't want you to agree out of pity or some misguided sense of justice. I wanted you to agree because it made sense for you, not because you felt sorry for me." Abigail almost laughed. "You think very highly of your negotiating skills if you believe I'd uproot my entire life out of pity for a man I barely know." Fair point. Something that might have been a smile touched Cole's mouth. "So you're not agreeing out of pity?" "I'm agreeing because winter's coming, my roof leaks, and you're offering me something I haven't had in years. A choice that's actually mine to make. She paused. And because maybe Sarah's right. Maybe being alone isn't the same as being independent. Who's Sarah? A friend. The only real friend I have in this town. Cole nodded. Bring her to the wedding. She should be there. The simple kindness of the gesture surprised Abigail. She'd expected a stark, efficient ceremony with strangers as witnesses. The fact that Cole thought about her wanting a friend present, it shifted something in her perception of him. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you've survived your first winter on the ranch, dealing with me every day. He picked up his hat. I'll leave you to pack your things. Saturday morning, 10 o'clock at the church. After he left, Abigail sank into her desk chair, staring at the empty room. What had she just done? In the space of 15 minutes, she'd agreed to marry a man she'd spoken to perhaps a dozen times, to move to an isolated ranch, to stand against a powerful enemy whose reach and resources dwarfed anything Cole could muster. She'd agreed to change her entire life based on nothing more than practical necessity and a stranger's promise. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the desk, willing them to steady. You can still change your mind, she whispered to herself. You can walk away right now. But even as she said it, she knew she wouldn't. The decision had been made days ago, maybe the moment Cole first walked through that door. Everything since had just been her mind catching up to what her instincts already knew. She was tired of being alone, tired of being afraid, tired of measuring her life in coins and careful choices. Maybe this would be a disaster. Maybe she'd regret it, but at least she'd be moving forward instead of standing still, slowly freezing in place. Mrs. Henderson took the news exactly as Abigail expected, with thin-lipped disapproval and poorly disguised curiosity. Married. To Cole Maddox. She said his name like it tasted bad. Well, I suppose that explains the late-night visits. There was one visit and it was perfectly proper. That's not what I heard. Then you heard wrong. Abigail kept her voice level. I'll be vacating my room by Saturday. I trust that gives you sufficient notice? More than sufficient. I already have someone interested in the space. Mrs. Henderson's eyes narrowed. You do know what people say about Cole Maddox? About his temper? His father drank himself into an early grave, and the son's cut from the same cloth. Then it's fortunate I'll be there to see for myself rather than relying on gossip. She excused herself before Mrs. Henderson could continue, climbing the stairs to begin the process of packing her life into the same trunk she'd arrived with 7 years ago. It didn't take long. She'd accumulated very little. Some books, her teaching materials, 2 good dresses and several serviceable ones, her mother's silver hairbrush. The sum total of her existence fit into 1 trunk and 2 carpet bags. Sarah appeared in the doorway as Abigail was folding her last dress. So it's true. You're really doing this. I am. Are you sure? Because if you have doubts, I have nothing but doubts. Abigail sat on the edge of her bed. But doubt never stopped winter from coming. At least this way I'm doing something instead of just waiting for things to get worse. Sarah sat beside her. Cole Maddox is lucky to have you. Cole Maddox is getting a school teacher with no dowry, no connections, and a tendency to speak her mind at inappropriate moments. I'm not sure lucky is the word. Maybe that's exactly what he needs. Sarah bumped her shoulder against Abigail's. Someone who won't let him brood alone on that ranch. Someone who'll tell him when he's being an idiot. I barely know him. You know enough. You know he works hard. You know he's honest. Nobody disputes that. You know he's fighting for what's his instead of just rolling over for hail like half the other ranchers have done. Sarah paused. And you know he chose you. That counts for something. Did it? Abigail wanted to believe it did, but the practical part of her mind kept insisting Cole had chosen convenience, not her, that she was simply the most logical solution to his problems. But then she remembered the way he'd looked at her in the schoolhouse, the vulnerability when he'd asked her to actually try, and she thought maybe it was more complicated than simple convenience. People were complicated. Motives were complicated. Maybe it was both, practical and personal, convenient and chosen. Friday passed in a blur of paperwork and preparations. Abigail gave formal notice to the school board, who received the news with mixed reactions. The chairman, Mr. Bentley, seemed relieved. A married woman continuing to teach. It's unusual, Miss Cross. Some parents may object. Then I suggest you address those objections, Mr. Bentley, because my marital status has no bearing on my ability to teach children their letters and numbers. Still, appearances matter. What matters is that I'm the only qualified teacher within 50 miles who's willing to work for what you pay. If you'd like to advertise the position and see who applies, by all means. She'd kept her voice pleasant, but the steel underneath was unmistakable. Otherwise, I'll be back Monday morning, same as always. Mr. Bentley had backed down, as she knew he would. Finding teachers willing to work frontier schools was nearly impossible. She had leverage, and for once, she wasn't afraid to use it. That evening, she had dinner with Sarah at the boarding house for the last time. Mrs. Henderson had made her opinions clear by seating them at the far end of the table, away from the other boarders, as if Abigail's upcoming marriage might be contagious. "You'll visit, won't you?" Sarah asked. "Once you're settled?" "Of course. And you'll come to the ranch. We'll have tea like civilized people instead of eating Mrs. Henderson's boiled cabbage." They both laughed, though Abigail's felt forced. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tonight was the last night of her old life. Lonely, yes, but known. Familiar. Safe in its limitations. She lay awake most of the night, listening to the sounds of the boarding house. Mr. Peterson's cough, Mrs. Henderson's heavy footsteps on the stairs, the wind rattling the loose shutter that had been broken since Abigail first arrived. All of it would soon be someone else's problem. When dawn came, gray and cold with the promise of snow closer than ever, Abigail rose and dressed in her best dress, dark blue wool, practical but well made. She pinned her hair carefully, surprised to find her hands steady. Whatever nerves she'd had during the night had burned themselves out. Now there was just a strange calm, like standing in the eye of a storm. Sarah helped her carry her trunk downstairs. Cole was already there, waiting with a wagon. He'd cleaned up again, shaved this time, wearing a suit that looked uncomfortable on his large frame. When he saw Abigail, something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "You look nice," he said. "So do you." It was the kind of bland pleasantry strangers exchanged, but there was an awkwardness to it that felt almost endearing. They were both trying, neither quite sure how. Cole loaded her trunk into the wagon while Abigail said her final goodbyes to Sarah. "Be happy," Sarah whispered, hugging her tight. "Or at least be safe." "I'll be both. Or neither. I'll write and let you know which." The ride to the church was silent. Abigail watched the town pass by. The general store where she bought her supplies, the land office where Hale had been conducting his business, the schoolhouse that would still be hers come Monday. Everything looked different somehow, like seeing a familiar place through new eyes. Reverend Michaels was waiting at the church with his wife as witness. Sarah arrived moments later, slightly out of breath from hurrying. And then there was one more person, a young man who resembled Cole enough to be family. "My nephew, Thomas," Cole said by way of introduction. "He's been living with me since his mother remarried and moved to California. Figured he should be here." Thomas looked about 17, gangly and awkward in his Sunday clothes. He gave Abigail a shy nod. "Ma'am, it's nice to meet you, Thomas. You're in my advanced mathematics class, aren't you?" "Yes, ma'am. You're a good teacher." The simple compliment touched her more than it should have. This was her new family, such as it was. A sullen rancher with secrets and a teenage nephew who probably resented his uncle for bringing a stranger into their home. They gathered inside the small church, and Reverend Michaels began the ceremony. The words washed over Abigail, the traditional vows about honor and cherish, about for better or worse. She repeated them when prompted, heard Cole do the same. His voice was steady, hers slightly less so. When it came time for the ring, Cole pulled out a simple gold band. Nothing fancy, no stones, just solid gold worn smooth with age. "It was my mother's," he said quietly, sliding it onto her finger. "She died when I was 10. My father kept it all these years." Abigail stared at the ring on her hand. This wasn't just a transaction anymore. This was history, family, the weight of Cole's past being passed to her. She looked up at him, saw something vulnerable in his eyes, and suddenly the full reality of what they were doing hit her. They were binding their lives together. Maybe not in the romantic way stories told, but in a way that might matter even more. In survival, in partnership, in the daily choice to keep choosing each other. "I'll take care of it," she said. Cole nodded, and Reverend Michaels pronounced them married, The kiss was brief, awkward, a brush of lips that satisfied tradition without suggesting anything more. But when they pulled apart, Cole's hand lingered on her arm for just a moment, and Abigail thought maybe they'd find their way to something real eventually. Or maybe they wouldn't, and that would have to be enough too. They signed the papers, Sarah and Mrs. Michaels signing as witnesses. It was official. Abigail Cross was now Abigail Maddox, for better or worse. Outside, the first snowflakes had started to fall. "We should go," Cole said, eyeing the sky. "Storm's coming faster than expected." They said quick goodbyes. Sarah hugged Abigail one more time, whispering, "You can always come back if you need to. Remember that." Then Abigail was in the wagon beside Cole, Thomas riding behind them on horseback, and they were leaving Sweetwater behind. The snow was falling heavier now, fat flakes that promised to accumulate quickly. Cole kept the horses moving at a steady pace, his attention split between the road and the darkening sky. "We'll make it before it gets bad," he said, more to himself than to her. They did, barely. By the time they reached the ranch, snow was falling in earnest, already starting to stick. Cole and Thomas worked quickly to get the horses settled, while Abigail stood in the doorway of what was now her home, watching the world turn white. This was it. She was here, married, committed. The town was miles away, soon to be unreachable once the storm hit full force. She was trapped with a man she barely knew, in a place that suddenly felt very remote, very isolated, very permanent. Thomas brushed past her, carrying her trunk. "Your room's upstairs, second door on the right. Uncle Cole said you'd want the one with the best light." The consideration surprised her. She followed Thomas up the narrow stairs to a room that was indeed filled with light from a large window facing east. Simple furniture, a bed, a dresser, a washstand, but clean and well-maintained. Someone had even put fresh linens on the bed. "Thank you, Thomas." He ducked his head, embarrassed. "I'll leave you to unpack." Alone in the room, Abigail sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the sounds of the house. Footsteps below. The murmur of male voices. The wind beginning to howl as the storm intensified. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Now she just had to figure out how to live with the choice she'd made. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of wind howling around the house like something alive and angry, snow piling against windows until the light inside turned gray and dim. 3 days of learning to navigate a new life with 2 near strangers who were now, somehow, family. The first morning, Abigail woke disoriented, forgetting for a moment where she was. Then she saw the unfamiliar room, felt the weight of the gold band on her finger, and remembered. Married. She was married now. Downstairs, she found Cole already dressed, stoking the fire in the main room. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment they just stared at each other with the awkwardness of people who'd slept under the same roof for the first time. "Coffee's ready," he said finally. "Thomas is still asleep. Kid could sleep through cannon fire." "Thank you." Abigail poured herself a cup, wrapping her hands around it. The house was warm but drafty, the wind finding every crack. "What needs doing today?" Cole seemed surprised by the question. "You don't need to—" "We agreed on partnership, Mr. Maddox. That means I pull my weight. It's Cole. You can call me Cole." "Then you should call me Abigail." He nodded slowly, testing the name. "Abigail." "All right." He gestured toward the kitchen. "Storm's too bad to do much outside. I need to check on the livestock, make sure the barn's secure. Inside, there's mending that needs doing, and the pantry could use organizing. Thomas is supposed to be studying for his exams, but good luck getting him to focus." They fell into a routine of sorts. Cole and Thomas bundled up and disappeared into the howling white to tend the animals while Abigail explored her new domain. The house was larger than it looked from outside. 3 bedrooms upstairs, the main room and kitchen below, and a small study off to the side that was clearly Cole's space. Papers covered the desk, some legal documents, others that looked like ranch accounts. She knew she shouldn't look, but curiosity won. The accounts told a story of careful management and slow losses. Cole wasn't broke, but he was being bled by legal fees and Hale's manipulations. Some entries were marked in red: disputed water rights, contested boundary lines, court costs. The numbers made her stomach tight. "Find anything interesting?" Abigail spun around. Cole stood in the doorway, snow still dusting his shoulders, watching her with an unreadable expression. "I wasn't snooping, I was just looking at the accounts." I know. He crossed to the desk, flipped through some papers. You asked for honesty. Might as well see exactly how bad things are. It's worse than you said. Yeah. He pulled off his gloves, dropped them on the desk. Hale's been filing challenges on every aspect of the ranch. Water access, grazing rights, even the timber on the North Ridge. Most of it's nonsense, but I have to pay lawyers to fight each claim. Even when I win, I lose because of the costs. Why is he doing this? What does he gain besides your land? Control. Cole's voice went hard. Hale wants to own everything from here to the territorial line. Ranchers, businesses, even the town itself. Anyone who won't sell or bow down, he destroys. It's not even about money at this point. It's about power. And your father wouldn't bow down. My father told him to go to hell and dared him to try taking what wasn't his. Cole's jaw tightened. 2 months later, my father was dead. Convenient timing, don't you think? Abigail studied him. You said you couldn't prove it. I can't. The only witness was a ranch hand who suddenly came into money and moved to California. By the time I thought to track him down, he'd disappeared. Could be dead for all I know. Or paid to stay gone. That too. Cole sat on the edge of the desk, suddenly looking tired. I know how it sounds. Bitter son blaming the rich man for everything wrong in his life. But I know what I know. I believe you. The words surprised them both. Cole looked at her sharply. Why? You don't know me well enough to believe me. No, but I know men like Hale. I've met them before. Men who think the world exists to serve them, who can't stand anyone refusing to play their games. She thought of her former fiancé, the way he'd expected her to simply accept his decision, as if her feelings didn't matter. People like that don't stop. They just find new ways to hurt you. Something shifted in Cole's expression. Your fiancé, the one who broke things off. He was like that? His family was. Old Boston money, very proper, very concerned with appearances. I was acceptable until I wasn't. Then I became an inconvenience to be managed. The bitterness in her voice surprised her. She thought she'd buried that anger years ago. They destroyed my reputation so thoroughly that staying in Boston became impossible. All very polite, very civilized. No violence necessary. That's worse in some ways. At least with Hale, I know we're enemies. You thought those people cared about you. I did. I was wrong. Abigail moved away from the desk, needing distance from the memories. That's why I came west. I thought if I could just get far enough away, start over somewhere no one knew my history. You could be free, Cole finished. Did it work? For a while. But loneliness has a way of finding you no matter how far you run. They stood in the small study, snow battering the windows, and Abigail felt the weight of their shared understanding. They were both running from something, both trying to survive in a world that seemed determined to grind them down. We should eat, Cole said finally. You must be hungry. The meal was awkward, but not unpleasant. Thomas emerged from his room looking rumpled and complained about the storm ruining his plans to visit friends in town. Cole reminded him about his studies. Thomas grumbled but eventually retreated with his books. Abigail offered to help with dinner preparation, and she and Cole moved around the kitchen in careful choreography, trying not to bump into each other, hyper-aware of proximity. You cook? She asked, surprised by his competence with the knife. Had to learn after my father died. Thomas and I would have starved otherwise. He chopped vegetables with efficient movements. I'm not fancy, but I can keep us fed. That's more than many men can say. What about you? Can you cook, or were you too busy being educated? There was no malice in the question, but Abigail bristled anyway. I can manage. My mother made sure I learned practical skills even if we couldn't afford fancy finishing school. Cole glanced at her. I wasn't insulting you. I know, I'm just... She stopped, realizing her defensiveness came from old wounds, not anything Cole had actually said. Sorry, I'm used to people assuming educated women are useless at practical tasks. You're not useless at anything from what I've seen. You're one of the most capable people I know. The compliment, delivered matter-of-factly while he stirred the pot, shouldn't have affected her. But it did. When was the last time someone had valued her competence instead of critiquing her unmarried status or questioning her choices? They ate dinner as the storm raged outside, and Abigail began to understand the reality of winter isolation. There was nowhere to go, nothing to do except exist in this small space with these people who were now her family. In town, she could always escape to the schoolhouse, take walks, visit Sarah. Here, there was only the house and the storm and the awkward dance of learning to share space. That night, lying in her bed listening to the wind, Abigail heard voices through the wall. Cole's room was next to hers, and through the thin walls she could hear him talking with Thomas. "She seems nice enough," Thomas was saying. "But isn't it weird, getting married to basically a stranger? People did it all the time in the old days. Arranged marriages, mail-order brides. This isn't that different. Still weird. Do you even like her?" A long pause. Abigail held her breath, hating herself for eavesdropping, but unable to stop. "I respect her," Cole said finally. "That's more important than liking someone. Respect lasts. Other feelings don't." "That's depressing, Uncle Cole." "That's realistic. Now get some sleep. Storm or no storm, you've got chores in the morning." Abigail stared at the dark ceiling. Respect. Cole respected her. It should have been enough. It was more than many marriages had. But part of her, the part she thought she'd killed 7 years ago, felt the sting of disappointment. The second day of the storm, Thomas got restless. By afternoon, he was pacing like a caged animal, complaining about the confinement. Cole snapped at him to sit down and study. Thomas snapped back that he was sick of studying. Within minutes, they were arguing, years of living together compressed into sharp words about responsibility and understanding and trying harder. Abigail watched from the kitchen, recognizing the dynamic. This wasn't about the storm or studying. This was about grief and resentment and all the things left unsaid between them. "That's enough," she said, her teacher voice cutting through their argument. They both turned to stare at her. "Thomas, get your books. We're going to review your mathematics together. Cole, you said the tack room needed inventory. Now's a good time." When neither moved, she added, "That wasn't a suggestion." To her surprise, they obeyed. Thomas slouched to the table with his books, while Cole grabbed his coat and disappeared toward the barn, looking relieved to escape. Abigail sat across from Thomas and opened his arithmetic text. "I'm not stupid," Thomas said defensively. "I know you probably I think you're bored and frustrated and taking it out on your uncle because he's the only target available." She met his eyes. "I also think you're smarter than your grades suggest, which means you're not trying. Why?" Thomas stared at his book. "What's the point? Uncle Cole's going to lose the ranch anyway. Hale's going to take everything, and we'll have nothing. Why waste time learning algebra? Because education is the one thing no one can take from you. Not Hale, not the courts, not bad luck or winter storms." Abigail leaned forward. "Your uncle is fighting for this ranch. The least you can do is fight for your own future. By doing math problems? By becoming someone who has choices. You're what, 17? In a few years, you'll be on your own. Do you want to be a ranch hand barely scraping by, or do you want to be someone who can actually build something?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "My mother said I should stay in California with her. Said there was nothing for me here except a failing ranch and an uncle too stubborn to know when he's beaten." "Is that what you think? That your uncle's beaten?" "I think he's tired. I think he's been fighting alone for too long." Thomas looked at her. "That's why he married you, isn't it? Because he needed help." "Partially, but also because I needed help. That's what partnership means. You both get something you need. Do you love him?" The blunt question caught Abigail off guard. "I barely know him." "But you married him anyway. That's either really practical or really desperate." "Maybe it's both." Abigail pulled the arithmetic book closer. "Now, let's look at these equations. I think you're mixing up your operations." They worked through the problems, and Abigail watched Thomas slowly engage, his natural intelligence emerging as he began to understand the concepts. He wasn't stupid. He'd just given up, convinced the effort was pointless. By the time Cole returned, snow-covered and cold, they'd made it through 3 chapters. "How'd it go?" Cole asked, warming his hands by the fire. "Thomas has been neglecting his studies because he's decided the future is hopeless," Abigail said bluntly. "We've corrected that misconception." Cole looked at his nephew, something complicated crossing his face. "Is that true?" Thomas shrugged. "Maybe. You listen to me." Cole's voice was rough. "I've spent 5 years fighting to keep this ranch because it's yours as much as mine. Your father, my brother, he built half of what we have. When I'm gone, this place is yours. So don't you dare give up on it before I do. What if we lose anyway?" "Then we lose." But we lose fighting not because we gave up. Cole's hand landed on Thomas's shoulder, firm. You understand me? Yeah, I understand. The moment passed, awkward but real. Abigail turned away, giving them privacy, and started preparing dinner. Behind her, she heard Cole say something too quiet to make out, heard Thomas respond. The storm howled outside, but inside, something had shifted. That night, Abigail found herself unable to sleep despite exhaustion. The storm had intensified, wind screaming around the house. Around midnight, she gave up and went downstairs, thinking tea might help. Cole was already in the kitchen, standing by the window and staring out at the white darkness. He turned when she entered, and she saw he was still fully dressed. Couldn't sleep either? She asked. Too loud. Always hated winter storms. He moved to the stove, added wood to keep it warm. Tea? Please. They sat at the table with steaming cups, the only sound the howling wind and the occasional crack of wood in the stove. It should have been uncomfortable, this midnight meeting with her new husband. Instead, it felt oddly natural. Thomas told me what you said to him, Cole said finally, about fighting for his future. He needed to hear it. Yeah, he did. I've been trying to tell him similar things for months, but he doesn't listen to me anymore. Too much history between us. Cole traced the rim of his cup. His mother, my sister-in-law, she wanted to take him to California when she remarried. Said he'd have better opportunities there, get away from all this mess with Hale. Part of me thinks she was right. But you kept him anyway. He's family, and he belongs here, even if he doesn't know it yet. Cole's voice dropped. His father died right after mine. Heart attack. Thomas was only 12. I've tried to raise him right, but I'm not exactly father material. Too rough, too angry. I've probably ruined him. You haven't ruined him. He's grieving and lost, but he's not ruined. He's actually quite bright when he lets himself engage. Takes after his mother that way. She was always the smart one in the family. Cole looked at Abigail. You're good with him. Better than I am. I've had practice with difficult students. Thomas is hardly the worst I've dealt with. Still, you didn't have to help him like that. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, remember? You're not obligated to care about my family problems. Maybe not. But here's the thing about living with people. You can't help but care eventually. It's not something you can wall off. Abigail met his eyes. Whether we like it or not, Thomas is part of this household now. That makes him my problem too. Cole studied her for a long moment. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone more, contained. More separate. I thought we'd just coexist, share space without really sharing anything else. He shook his head. But you jump right in. Take charge. Make yourself part of things. Would you prefer I didn't? No, it's just different from what I imagined. He paused. Better, actually. The admission hung between them. Outside, the storm began to ease slightly, the wind dropping from a scream to a steady howl. Abigail wrapped her hands tighter around her cup, suddenly aware of how intimate this felt, sitting in a dark kitchen in the middle of the night, talking about things that mattered. Can I ask you something? Cole said. Why'd you really say yes? And don't tell me it was just the practical reasons. There had to be something else. Abigail considered lying, keeping up the pretense that this was purely transactional. But they'd promised honesty, and maybe honesty meant admitting truths she barely wanted to acknowledge to herself. I was tired, she said quietly. Tired of being alone. Tired of measuring my life in coins and careful choices. Tired of going to sleep every night in that cold room and wondering if this was all there would ever be. She looked up at him. You offered me something different. Maybe not better, maybe not even good, but different. And I realized I'd rather risk different than guarantee more of the same. Cole was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. That's the bravest thing I've heard in a while. It's not brave, it's desperate. Sometimes those are the same thing. He reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers but not quite touching. I know this isn't what either of us dreamed of when we were young, but maybe we can make it something real anyway, something that matters. Maybe. Abigail looked at his hand so close to hers. She could close that distance easily, just a small movement, and they'd be connected. But something held her back, fear maybe, or the memory of every other time she'd reached for connection and found emptiness instead. Cole seemed to understand. He withdrew his hand, stood. We should try to sleep. Storm's breaking. Tomorrow, we'll need to dig out. Abigail nodded, stayed seated as he left. She finished her tea alone in the dark kitchen, feeling the weight of possibilities she wasn't quite brave enough to grasp. The third day, the storm finally blew itself out. By afternoon, watery sunlight broke through the clouds, turning the snow into a field of painful brilliance. The world had been transformed, drifts piled higher than windows, the landscape smoothed into unfamiliar shapes. Cole and Thomas spent the day digging out the barn, the pathways, the access road. Abigail threw herself into organizing the house, channeling her restless energy into sorting pantries and mending clothes. She found a box of old photographs in the study and spent an hour looking at them. Cole as a boy with his father, Thomas as a baby, family gatherings long past. She was studying a photo of a woman who must have been Cole's mother when he found her. "That's her," he confirmed, looking over her shoulder. "Elizabeth Maddox died when I was 10. Pneumonia. She's beautiful. She was fierce. My father used to say she could out-stubborn a mule and outthink a lawyer. She ran this ranch as much as he did, maybe more." Abigail set down the photo carefully. "Is that why you thought a wife would help your legal position? Because you remember what your mother did?" "Partially, but also because you reminded me of her. That first day in the schoolhouse, the way you handled me, all cold logic and steel spine. My mother would have liked you." The comparison settled something in Abigail's chest. She'd been so focused on what this marriage wasn't, romantic, passionate, chosen out of love, that she'd missed what it might actually be. A partnership built on respect and compatibility. A practical foundation that might actually last longer than feelings that burned hot and died fast. That evening, she made dinner while Cole handled paperwork in his study, and Thomas actually did his homework without being nagged. It felt almost domestic, almost normal, almost like they were actually a family instead of three people thrown together by circumstance. They were eating when the knock came, hard, insistent, commanding. Cole's whole body tensed. He stood slowly, hand moving to the rifle mounted by the door. "Stay here," he said to Abigail and Thomas. But Abigail followed him, ignoring his glare. She'd agreed to partnership, not obedience. If there was danger, she wanted to see it. Cole opened the door to reveal three men on horseback, snow-covered and grim-faced. The one in front was older, hard-eyed, wearing a marshal's badge that gleamed in the fading light. "Cole Maddox?" The marshal's voice was professionally neutral. "That's me. I have papers for you, legal notice regarding your property dispute with Victor Hale." He handed over a thick envelope. "You're ordered to appear before the territorial judge 2 weeks from today. Failure to appear will result in default judgment in Hale's favor." Cole took the papers, his face expressionless. 2 weeks. In the middle of winter. Court doesn't stop for weather, son. You know that. The marshal's expression softened slightly. "For what it's worth, I've known you since you were a boy. I hope you can prove your case." "So do I." The men rode away and Cole stood in the doorway reading the papers. Abigail watched his face grow harder with each page. "What does it say?" she asked. "Hale's claiming the original land grant was fraudulent, that my grandfather never had legal right to this property, which means my father didn't, which means I don't." He looked at her, and she saw something close to defeat in his eyes. "He's got witnesses, documents, evidence I can't refute because most of my family's records were destroyed in that fire." "So what do we do?" "We? This isn't your fight, Abigail. I'm your wife. That makes it my fight, too." She took the papers from him, scanning them quickly. Legal jargon, dates, claims, and counterclaims. It was deliberately complex, designed to confuse and intimidate. "Who handled your father's legal affairs?" "Old Man Hutchins in Cheyenne. But he died 2 years ago, and his son sold the practice. The new lawyer has no record of our files." "Convenient." "Very." Cole moved back inside, slumped into a chair by the fire. "I knew this was coming. I just hoped I'd have more time." Thomas had gone pale. "They can't just take everything. There has to be something we can do. I've been trying to do something for 5 years. It hasn't been enough." Abigail looked between them. Cole defeated, Thomas frightened, and felt something fierce rise in her chest. She'd married into this fight. She'd chosen this battle when she agreed to stand beside Cole. And she'd learned long ago that staying down after being knocked down was how you lost everything that mattered. Then we find a way to make it enough, she said firmly. Cole, you said the original documents were lost in a fire. When was this fire? 20 years ago, burned half the county records. County records? So other people lost documents too? Yeah, lots of them. They had to rebuild the system from testimony and secondary records. Then that's our angle. If the system was rebuilt before, it can be challenged now. We find people who remember your grandfather's original claim. We find anyone who has secondary records, tax payments, witness statements, anything that establishes your family's legitimate ownership. Cole looked at her like she'd suggested they fly to the moon. Abigail, I've tried that. Most of those people are dead or gone. Then we find the ones who aren't. 2 weeks is longer than you think if we use it wisely. She turned to Thomas. You said your father helped build this ranch. Did he keep any records? Journals? Letters? Anything? I don't know. Maybe. Thomas stood straighter. His things are still in the attic. Uncle Cole couldn't bring himself to sort through them. Then that's where we start. Abigail was already moving toward the stairs. Tomorrow, we go through everything. Every box, every paper, every scrap that might help. Abigail. Cole's voice stopped her. Why are you doing this? She turned back to face him. Because someone has to. Because you've been fighting alone for too long, and because... She paused, realizing the truth as she said it. Because this is my home now too, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let someone take it without a fight. The attic was freezing, dim, and packed with the accumulated debris of 3 generations. Abigail stood at the top of the narrow stairs, surveying the chaos of boxes, broken furniture, and dust-covered trunks while her breath clouded in the cold air. This is going to take days, Thomas said from behind her, sounding overwhelmed. Then we'd better start now. Abigail pulled her shawl tighter and moved toward the nearest stack of boxes. Bring up more lamps. We'll work until dark. They did. For hours, they sorted through the remnants of lives lived and lost. Cole's grandmother's wedding china, carefully wrapped but never used. His father's old ranch ledgers from before the fire, the ink faded but still legible. Boxes of clothes, tools, broken watches, letters yellow with age. The physical evidence of a family that had worked this land for 40 years. Abigail read every paper, no matter how insignificant it seemed. A receipt for fence wire from 1873. A letter from the Territorial Land Office acknowledging payment of annual fees. A photograph of Cole's grandfather standing in front of the original homestead cabin, the date scratched on the back, 1867. This, she said, holding up the photograph, this proves your grandfather was here in 1867. That's documentation. Cole, who'd joined them an hour ago, looked skeptical. It's just a picture. It's evidence of occupation. Combined with other records, it builds a timeline. We're not looking for one perfect document. We're building a case from pieces. She set the photograph aside carefully. What else is in here? Thomas dragged over another trunk. This was my dad's. I haven't looked through it since he died. The boy's voice cracked slightly on the last word. Cole's hand landed on his shoulder, squeezed once. Then Thomas opened the trunk, and they began sorting through his father's things. James Maddox had been a record keeper. His trunk contained journals spanning 15 years, detailed accounts of ranch operations, notes about cattle purchases and land improvements. More importantly, it contained letters, dozens of them, correspondence with banks, suppliers, government offices, all referencing the Maddox Ranch as an established, legitimate operation. Your father documented everything, Abigail said, paging through a journal from 1878. Look at this. He recorded every transaction, every payment, every legal filing. This is exactly what we need. Dad was always writing, Thomas said quietly. Used to drive Uncle Cole crazy, said a ranch didn't need so much paperwork. Your father was smarter than I gave him credit for. Cole's voice was rough. I thought he was wasting time. Turns out he was building our defense. They worked through the afternoon and into the evening, creating piles of potentially useful documents. By the time darkness forced them to stop, they'd assembled a substantial collection, not enough to guarantee victory, but enough to fight back. Downstairs, Abigail made a late dinner while Cole and Thomas washed the attic dust from their hands and faces. The mood had shifted. They weren't defeated anymore. They were preparing for battle. We need a lawyer, Abigail said as they ate, someone who can present this evidence properly. I can't afford Hale's kind of lawyers. We don't need Hale's kind. We need someone honest and competent. Who's the best attorney within a day's ride? Cole thought for a moment. Marcus Bennett in Cheyenne. He handled my father's estate. Honest man, knows territorial law inside and out. But he's expensive. How expensive? More than we have. Abigail pulled off her mother's gold band, the only valuable thing she owned. Then we sell this. No. Cole's response was immediate. That's your mother's ring. And this is our home. I know which matters more. She set the ring on the table. We fight with what we have, Cole. No holding back. Cole stared at the ring, then at her. Something shifted in his expression, respect deepening into something else, something Abigail couldn't quite name. You mean that? You'd actually sell your mother's ring for this fight? I would, but hopefully it won't come to that. How much do we actually need for Bennett's retainer? They spent the next hour going over finances, and Abigail discovered she had a knack for numbers. She found expenses that could be cut, payments that could be delayed, resources that could be leveraged. By the time they finished, they'd scraped together enough for Bennett's basic fee, assuming he'd take the case. I'll ride to Cheyenne tomorrow, Cole said. Roads should be clear enough. We'll ride to Cheyenne, Abigail corrected. I want to meet this lawyer, hear what he thinks about our case. It's a hard ride in winter. I rode harder to get out here from Boston 7 years ago. I can handle a day trip to Cheyenne. Cole opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. Fine. Thomas, you'll stay here, manage the ranch. By myself? Thomas looked equal parts scared and proud. You're 17. Time you learn to handle things alone. Cole's voice softened slightly. You can do this. I trust you. The simple statement hit Thomas visibly. His spine straightened. I won't let you down. I know you won't. That night, Abigail lay awake planning. They had documents, but they needed more. They needed witness testimony, community support, evidence that the Maddox family had been upstanding members of the territory for decades. She made mental lists, drew connections, built arguments in her head the way she'd once built lesson plans. She was so focused on strategy that she almost missed the sound from Cole's room. A thud, like something falling. Then silence. She waited, listening. Another sound, something between a gasp and a groan. Abigail was out of bed before she fully decided to move. She knocked on Cole's door. Cole, are you all right? No answer. She knocked again, harder. Cole, answer me. When silence stretched, she opened the door. Cole was sitting on the edge of his bed, head in his hands, breathing hard. In the moonlight streaming through the window, she could see he was shaking. Get out, he said, voice strained. I'm fine. You're clearly not fine. Abigail stepped inside, closing the door behind her. What's wrong? Nothing. Just a bad dream. Leave me alone. But she'd noticed the way he was holding his left arm, the tension in his shoulders. You're hurt. Let me see. It's nothing. Cole Maddox, I swear if you say nothing one more time, I'm going to hit you myself. Now let me see your arm. He looked up at her, and in the moonlight she saw frustration and pain warring in his expression. Finally, he extended his arm. Abigail lit the lamp and examined it carefully. The wrist was swollen, already bruising. How did this happen? Slipped on ice this afternoon when we were digging out. Landed wrong. It's fine, just bruised. It might be broken, or at least sprained badly. She touched it gently, felt him flinch. You need to see a doctor. We don't have time for doctors. We need to get to Cheyenne tomorrow. Then I'll ride to Cheyenne while you stay here and rest that arm. The hell you will. You don't know the route, don't know the dangers. Then draw me a map and tell me what to watch for. I'm perfectly capable of riding to a city and hiring a lawyer. She met his stubborn glare with one of her own. You can't do everything yourself, Cole. That's the whole point of having a partner. They faced off in the small bedroom, neither willing to back down. Finally, Cole's shoulders sagged. Fine. But Thomas goes with you. Agreed. Cole flexed his injured wrist, winced. There's liniment in the kitchen, bottom shelf, blue bottle. Abigail fetched it, along with clean cloth for wrapping. Back in his room, she worked carefully, applying the liniment and binding his wrist. Her hands were steady, professional, but she was acutely aware of his proximity, the warmth of his skin, the way he watched her face as she worked. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. Do what? Treat your injury? I'm hardly going to leave you sitting here in pain. I mean all of it. Fighting for the ranch, selling your mother's ring, riding to Cheyenne in winter. None of this is your responsibility. Abigail finished wrapping his wrist and looked up at him. They were very close. She was standing between his knees, his face level with hers. When does it become my responsibility? After a month? A year? Or does it never count because this marriage started as a business arrangement? I don't know. I just don't want you to feel obligated. I don't feel obligated. I feel angry. Someone's trying to steal what's yours, what's ours now, and I won't stand by and let it happen. Her voice dropped. I spent 7 years standing by while other people made decisions about my life. I'm done being passive. Cole's good hand came up, almost touched her face, then dropped. You're not what I expected at all. You said that before. It's still true. I thought I was getting a practical arrangement. Instead, I got... He stopped, seemed to struggle for words. I got you, and you're more than I deserved. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Abigail felt something shift in her chest, a wall she'd carefully maintained starting to crack. It would be so easy to close that last bit of distance, to let this moment become something more than just partners tending injuries in the middle of the night. But fear held her back. Fear of wanting too much, of expecting things that wouldn't materialize, of repeating old patterns and old hurts. Get some sleep, she said, stepping back. You'll need your strength even if you're not making the ride. She left before he could respond, closing the door firmly behind her. Back in her own room, she pressed her hands to her face and tried to calm her racing heart. This was supposed to be simple, practical, a marriage of convenience that stayed convenient. So why did her hands still tingle from touching his skin? Why did his words, "You're more than I deserved," echo in her mind like a promise she was afraid to believe? The next morning, Abigail and Thomas set out for Cheyenne before dawn. Cole stood in the doorway watching them go, his injured arm bound against his chest, his expression unreadable. Abigail caught his eyes once before they rode out, saw something there that made her chest tight. The ride to Cheyenne took 6 hours through snow-packed roads and bitter cold. Thomas proved to be good company, talkative once away from his uncle, full of stories about the ranch and his father and the life he'd known before everything changed. Uncle Cole tries, Thomas said as they rode. He's just not good at talking about feelings and stuff. But he cares. More than he shows. I'm beginning to understand that. Do you like him? I mean, really like him, not just the marriage arrangement thing? Abigail considered the question. I respect him. I admire his determination. And I'm starting to see that there's more to him than he lets people see. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have right now. Cheyenne was larger than Sweetwater, with actual streets and brick buildings and the bustle of territorial commerce. They found Marcus Bennett's office above a mercantile store. The lawyer himself was younger than Abigail expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and ink-stained fingers. Mrs. Maddox. He stood when she entered, shook her hand firmly. I heard Cole had gotten married. Congratulations. Thank you, though this isn't a social call. She laid out their documents on his desk. We need your help. Bennett listened as she explained the situation, occasionally asking questions, his expression growing graver as the scope of the problem became clear. When she finished, he sat back in his chair and whistled low. Hale's not playing around. These challenges are comprehensive, well-researched. His lawyers are good. But can you fight them? With what you've brought me? Maybe. The evidence is circumstantial but substantial. If we can get testimony from longtime residents, establish a pattern of legitimate ownership and operation, we might have a case. He paused. But I won't lie to you. It's going to be an uphill battle. Hale has resources we don't. We have the truth on our side. Bennett's smile was sad. Truth doesn't always win in court, Mrs. Maddox. Money and good lawyers usually do. Then we make sure you're better than his lawyers. Can you do that? He studied her for a long moment. I can try, but my retainer, we have it. Abigail counted out the money they'd scraped together, adding her mother's ring at the end. And this, if it's not enough. Bennett picked up the ring, examined it. This is worth more than my retainer. Then consider it insurance. Whatever it takes to win this case, Mr. Bennett, that's what we're asking. He set the ring down carefully. Keep it. I'll take the case for what you've got here, but I want something in return. I want your help. You clearly understand the documentation better than most. I'll need someone who can organize witnesses, track down records, build the narrative. Can you do that? Yes. Then we have a deal. He extended his hand. I'll file a response to Hale's motion by end of week. In the meantime, start gathering those witnesses. Anyone who knew your husband's father or grandfather, anyone who can testify to the family's legitimate claim. We need bodies in that courtroom willing to speak truth. Abigail shook his hand, feeling the first real spark of hope since the marshal had delivered those papers. They had a lawyer. They had a strategy. They had a fighting chance. The ride back was faster, Abigail eager to tell Cole what they'd accomplished. But as they crested the final hill before the ranch, something felt wrong. Smoke rose from the barn. Too much smoke. The wrong color. Thomas saw it too and kicked his horse into a gallop. They found Cole standing in front of the barn watching it burn. The fire was already dying down. Whatever had burned had mostly been consumed. His face was black with soot, his injured arm hanging useless at his side. "What happened?" Abigail demanded, sliding off her horse. "Visitors." Cole's voice was flat. 3 of them, wearing masks, set fire to the hay storage, ran off before I could stop them. If I'd had both hands, he trailed off, rage and frustration evident in every line of his body. "Anyone hurt?" "Just property damage. They wanted to scare us, not kill us." This time, Thomas was already assessing the damage. "It's not as bad as it looks. The main structure's intact. We lost hay and some equipment, but the animals are safe." Abigail turned to Cole. "This was Hale." "No proof of that." "We don't need proof to know the truth. He's escalating." She grabbed Cole's good arm. "We need to report this to the marshal." "The marshal can't do anything without evidence, and masked men in the night don't leave evidence." "So we do nothing?" "We do what we planned. Fight in court. Win legally. That's the only way to stop him permanently." Cole finally looked at her and she saw exhaustion beneath the anger. "How'd it go with Bennett?" "He took the case. He thinks we have a chance." She quickly explained what the lawyer had said about needing witnesses, about building a comprehensive defense. As she talked, she watched some of the tension leave Cole's shoulders. "So we have a strategy. We have a strategy. And Bennett's filing a response by end of week, which means Hale's going to know we're fighting back seriously." "Good. Let him know." Cole looked back at the smoldering barn. "He wanted to scare us. Instead, he just made me angrier." They spent the evening securing what could be saved, moving animals to safer locations, making lists of supplies they'd need to replace. It was exhausting work, made worse by Cole's injury and the psychological weight of knowing they'd been targeted. That night, Abigail found Cole in his study, staring at maps of the property with a whiskey bottle beside him. She'd never seen him drink before. "That won't help," she said from the doorway. "Maybe not, but it takes the edge off." He poured another glass, downed it. 3 of them. If I'd had both hands, I could have stopped them, could have caught one, made him talk. Or they could have hurt you worse, or killed you. Abigail moved into the room, took the bottle away. "This isn't your fault. It's my fight. That makes it my fault when other people get hurt." "Other people? You mean me? Thomas?" She set the bottle down hard. "We chose to be here. We chose to fight. You don't get to take responsibility for our choices. You chose to marry me, not to have your home attacked in the night. I chose to stand beside someone fighting a powerful enemy. I knew there would be consequences." Abigail pulled up a chair, sat across from him. "Listen to me. We can't control what Hale does. We can only control how we respond. And drinking yourself stupid isn't a response. It's surrender." Cole's jaw tightened. "I'm not surrendering." "Then prove it. Get up tomorrow, work with Thomas to repair the barn, help me track down witnesses for Bennett. Fight back the way we planned instead of sitting here drowning in guilt and whiskey." They stared at each other across the desk. Finally, Cole pushed the whiskey bottle toward her. "You're right. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Just do better tomorrow." She stood, moved toward the door. "And Cole? What happened tonight? It proves we're getting to him. Hale's scared enough to resort to violence. That means our strategy's working. Or it means he's more dangerous than we thought. Maybe both." Abigail paused in the doorway. "But I'd rather face a scared enemy than an arrogant one. Scared people make mistakes." She left him with that thought. In her room, she sat by the window and stared out at the dark ranch, at the shadow of the burned barn, and felt the weight of what they'd taken on. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was personal. It was dangerous. And despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the very real threat, Abigail felt more alive than she had in 7 years. She was fighting for something that mattered, standing beside people she'd started to care about, building something that might actually last. Whatever came next, at least she wouldn't face it alone. The following days blurred into focused activity. Thomas worked on barn repairs with neighbors Cole called in to help. Abigail began the painstaking process of tracking down witnesses, elderly ranchers who'd known Cole's grandfather, shop owners who'd done business with the family for decades, even the minister who'd baptized Cole as a baby. She rode into town 3 times that week, conducting what amounted to interviews in parlors and shops and the church vestibule. Some people were willing to help immediately. Others needed convincing. A few refused outright, too scared of Hale's reach. "He owns half this territory," one old rancher told her. "I speak against him in court. I lose everything." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Maddox, but I can't help you." But enough people agreed. Enough people remembered the Maddox family with respect and affection. Enough believed in standing up to bullies even when it cost something. By the end of the week, Abigail had commitments from 7 witnesses willing to testify. She also discovered something unexpected. People liked her. Maybe it was her directness, or her obvious determination, or just the novelty of a woman taking charge. Whatever the reason, she found herself welcomed into homes, offered coffee and sympathy, treated like someone who mattered. Sarah found her at the general store one afternoon. "I've heard about what you're doing. Everyone's talking about it. Cole Maddox's new wife, taking on Victor Hale. We're just defending what's ours." "You're doing more than that. You're giving people hope that maybe Hale can be beaten." Sarah lowered her voice. "Be careful, Abigail. Hale doesn't like losing." "I noticed. Someone burned our barn last week." Sarah's face went pale. "Are you serious? Were you hurt?" "We're fine. Angry, but fine." Abigail selected the supplies she needed. "Actually, I'm glad I ran into you. I want you to have something." She pressed a sealed envelope into Sarah's hand. "If anything happens to me, and I'm not saying it will, but if it does, give this to Marcus Bennett in Cheyenne. It contains everything I've learned about Hale's operation, names of people he's bribed or threatened, documentation of his pattern of intimidation, insurance, basically." "Abigail, you're scaring me." "Good. Someone should be scared besides me." She managed to smile. "I don't think anything will happen, but I want to be prepared." That evening, she rode back to the ranch as sunset painted the snow gold and pink. The barn repairs were progressing. The structure was sound again, though they'd need to replace all the burned hay before winter deepened. Thomas and Cole were working together, and Abigail was struck by how much their relationship had improved in just 2 weeks. Grief and fear had kept them distant. Purpose had brought them closer. Inside, she found Cole studying maps again, but this time without the whiskey bottle. "Bennett sent word," he said without preamble. "The hearing's been moved up, 5 days from now instead of 2 weeks. Hale's lawyers pushed for an earlier date." "Why would they do that?" "To catch us unprepared. They don't know we've been gathering evidence." Cole looked up at her. "Can your witnesses be ready by then?" "They'll have to be." Abigail's mind was already racing, rearranging schedules, calculating travel times. "We need to get them to the courthouse. Some are elderly, the roads are bad. I'll arrange transportation. You just make sure they show up." They worked late into the night, refining strategy, going over testimony, anticipating counterarguments. At some point, Thomas brought them food and coffee, then retreated to his room. The house grew quiet around them. "You should sleep," Cole said finally. "You've been pushing too hard." "So have you." "I'm used to it. You're not." Abigail set down her pen, rubbed her tired eyes. "Can I ask you something? What happens if we lose? What's your plan?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. "I fight anyway. Maybe not legally, but I fight. This land is mine. My family's blood is in this soil. I won't hand it over without exhausting every option. Even if it means breaking the law?" Even then. The admission should have scared her. Instead, it just made her sad. "Don't do that. Don't throw away your future for revenge." "It's not revenge. It's justice. Justice happens in courtrooms. Everything else is just more violence. She reached across the desk, touched his hand. Promise me. If we lose, we find another way. Legal way. Why do you care so much? If we lose, you can leave. Go back east, start over somewhere safe. Because that's not who I am anymore. I'm not the woman who runs when things get hard. Abigail held his gaze. I'm the woman who stays and fights. And I need you to promise you won't do something stupid that gets you killed or imprisoned. Cole turned his hand over, clasped hers. I can't promise that. Then promise you'll think about it. Promise that before you do anything drastic, you'll talk to me. Can you do that much? His thumb traced across her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. Yeah, I can do that. They sat there, hands clasped across the desk, and Abigail felt the careful distance they'd maintained start to dissolve. This was no longer just practical partnership. Somewhere between the storm and the barn fire and the midnight planning sessions, it had become something more. Something that scared her almost as much as losing the ranch. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and bright, the kind of winter day that hurt to breathe. Abigail woke before dawn, her stomach twisted with nerves she refused to acknowledge. In the mirror, she looked pale but determined, the schoolteacher armor she'd perfected over 7 years firmly in place. Downstairs, Cole was already dressed in his only suit, the one he'd worn for their wedding. He was attempting to tie his necktie one-handed, his injured wrist still bound, and making a mess of it. Here! Abigail took over without asking, her fingers working the silk into a proper knot. They stood very close, her hands at his throat, his eyes on her face. There. Thank you. His voice was rougher than usual. For everything, not just the tie. Thank me after we win. What if we don't? Abigail met his eyes. Then we figure out what comes next. Together. The word hung between them. Together. Such a small word for such a massive shift. They'd started as strangers making a practical arrangement. Now they were partners preparing for battle, and Abigail couldn't remember exactly when the change had happened. Maybe it had been gradual, built through shared meals and midnight conversations and the slow accumulation of trust. Or maybe it had been sudden, crystallizing in a moment she hadn't even recognized as significant. Either way, they were together now, and that meant something. Thomas appeared looking uncomfortable in his Sunday clothes. The wagon's ready. Mr. Bennett said to meet him at the courthouse by 9. They arrived in Cheyenne to find the courthouse steps already crowded. News of the hearing had spread, drawing spectators curious to see the conflict between Cole Maddox and Victor Hale play out in legal theater. Abigail spotted their witnesses gathered nervously to one side. The elderly ranchers, the shopkeepers, Reverend Michaels looking grave in his formal coat, and on the other side, Hale's contingent. The man himself stood surrounded by 3 lawyers in expensive suits, all polish and confidence. When Hale saw Cole, his smile was predatory. Maddox, I heard you got yourself a wife. How domestic. His eyes slid to Abigail, assessing and dismissive in one glance. Mrs. Maddox, I hope your husband explained what you were getting into before you agreed to tie yourself to a sinking ship. He explained perfectly, Mr. Hale. Abigail kept her voice pleasant, her expression neutral. He explained that some men think power means they can take whatever they want, regardless of right or law. He also explained that sometimes those men need to be reminded that courts exist for a reason. Hale's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. How refreshing. A woman with opinions. I'm sure that makes for a lively household. It makes for an honest one. You should try it sometime. Before Hale could respond, Marcus Bennett appeared, ushering them inside. Save it for the courtroom, Mrs. Maddox. Though I appreciate the enthusiasm. The courtroom was exactly what Abigail expected. Wood paneling, stern portraits of territorial officials, a judge's bench that loomed over everything else like judgment itself. They took their seats at the defendant's table while Hale's lawyers arranged themselves across the aisle with military precision. Judge Carmichael entered, a man in his 60s with white hair and eyes that suggested he'd heard every lie the frontier had to offer. He surveyed the packed courtroom with something like resignation. This is a hearing to determine the validity of land ownership claims regarding the Maddox Ranch, disputed by petitioner Victor Hale. Mr. Wesley, you may present your opening argument. Hale's lead lawyer stood, a smooth man with gray temples and a voice like honey over steel. Your Honor, this case is straightforward. The land in question was improperly acquired through fraudulent documentation 40 years ago. We have evidence that the original land grant was never legally transferred to the Maddox family, rendering all subsequent claims void. We ask that the court recognize Mr. Hale's legitimate claim and order transfer of the property. He spoke for 20 minutes, weaving a narrative of deception and illegal occupation. The documents he presented looked official, stamped, and signed and entirely convincing. Abigail watched the judge's face, trying to read his reaction, seeing nothing. Then it was Bennett's turn. Your Honor, what Mr. Wesley calls fraud, we call 40 years of legitimate ownership, backed by continuous occupation, tax payments, and community recognition. The Maddox family has worked this land since 1867, improving it, paying every fee, meeting every legal requirement. That Mr. Hale now covets the property doesn't make its ownership fraudulent. It makes his challenge opportunistic. Bennett laid out their timeline methodically, building a case from the accumulated weight of small evidences. Tax receipts. Witness statements. James Maddox's meticulous journals. The photograph of Cole's grandfather standing in front of the original homestead. Each piece alone might be dismissed. Together, they painted a picture of legitimate, unbroken ownership. We call our first witness, Bennett said, Augustus Mills. The old rancher stood shakily, made his way to the witness box. He was maybe 80, weathered by decades of frontier life, but his voice was strong when he spoke. I've known the Maddox family since Cole's grandfather first claimed that land, helped him build his first cabin, in fact. There was never any question about the legitimacy of his claim. He filed properly, paid his fees, worked the required years, everything legal and right. Wesley's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned Mills's memory, his possible bias, his financial connections to the Maddox family. But the old man held firm. I know what I know, son, and I know the Maddox family earned that land fair and square. The testimony continued. Reverend Michaels spoke about baptizing 3 generations of Maddoxes. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house, surprisingly, testified that she'd been doing business with the family for 30 years and never heard whisper of improper ownership. One by one, their witnesses built a wall of community testimony. But then Hale's lawyers brought out their weapon. We called James Pritchard to the stand. Abigail didn't recognize the name, but she saw Cole stiffen. A man in his 50s took the stand, well-dressed, nervous. Mr. Pritchard, you worked as a clerk in the Territorial Land Office in 1867, correct? Yes, sir. And do you recall the Maddox land claim? I do. There were irregularities. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Carmichael banged his gavel. Continue. The documentation was incomplete. The original grant holder, a Mr. Samuel Worth, died before the transfer could be properly executed. The Maddox family took possession anyway, without clear legal authority. Abigail felt her heart sink. This was devastating. If the original transfer was invalid, everything built on it crumbled. She glanced at Bennett, saw him scribbling notes furiously, his face set. Cole leaned forward. That's not true. My grandfather paid Worth's widow for the claim. I've heard the story my whole life. Can you prove it? Bennett whispered. Not with documents. The fire. Then we need something else. Think. Is there anyone who might know details about that transaction? Cole's face was pale. Worth's widow died decades ago. Her children moved east. There's no one... He stopped. Wait. There might be someone. Samuel Worth had a business partner, another homesteader. They filed adjacent claims. If Worth's widow sold our land, she probably sold the partner's claim to someone too. Those records might still exist. Bennett's eyes lit up. What was the partner's name? Jensen. Eric Jensen. Your Honor, Bennett stood. I request a brief recess to pursue a relevant line of inquiry. Judge Carmichael frowned. This is highly irregular, Mr. Bennett. I understand, Your Honor, but if Mr. Pritchard's testimony is accurate, there should be corresponding records regarding adjacent property. I believe those records will illuminate the situation considerably. You have 1 hour, Mr. Bennett. Not a minute more. Bennett grabbed Abigail's arm. The land office. We need to find those Jensen records. If there's a pattern of proper transfer for that era, it undercuts Pritchard's testimony about irregularities. They ran through the cold streets to the Territorial Land Office. Bennett shouting explanations to a confused clerk about property records from 1867. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles, looked overwhelmed. That's 40 years ago. The filing system from before the fire is a mess. Then unmess it, Abigail snapped, quickly. Something in her tone galvanized him. They descended into the basement records room, a chaos of boxes and ledgers and dust. Abigail took one section, Bennett another, the clerk a third. They tore through records, scanning dates, looking for Jensen's name. Here. The clerk held up a ledger triumphantly. Eric Jensen, land claim filed May 1867, adjacent to Samuel Worth claim. And look, sale recorded in December 1867 to... He squinted. Margaret Worth. She bought Jensen's claim after her husband died. Meaning she had money to buy property, Bennett said, understanding dawning. Which means she got money from somewhere, probably from selling her late husband's claim to Cole's grandfather. It's not proof of the Maddox transaction, directly, Abigail said, but it establishes that Margaret Worth was actively buying and selling land claims that year, which contradicts the idea that the transfers were somehow improper. It's enough to create doubt. Let's go. They burst back into the courtroom with minutes to spare, Bennett clutching the ledger like a weapon. Judge Carmichael raised an eyebrow. Mr. Bennett, I hope this was worth the disruption. I believe it was, Your Honor. I'd like to recall Mr. Pritchard to the stand. Pritchard returned, looking less confident. Bennett opened the ledger. Mr. Pritchard, you testified that the Maddox land transfer in 1867 was irregular because Samuel Worth died before proper documentation could be completed. Is that correct? Yes. And yet, according to these land office records, Margaret Worth, Samuel's widow, purchased the adjacent Jensen claim in December of that same year. How would she have funds for such a purchase if she hadn't sold her late husband's claim? Pritchard's face went red. That's speculation. There could be other sources. Could be. But isn't the simplest explanation that she sold the Worth claim to the Maddox family and used those funds to purchase the Jensen property? Isn't that consistent with standard frontier practice? Objection. Wesley stood. This is conjecture, Your Honor. Overruled. Answer the question, Mr. Pritchard. It's possible. But without documentation of the Maddox sale, documentation that was destroyed in a fire, how convenient for those who might want to challenge old claims. Bennett's voice hardened. Mr. Pritchard, who paid you to testify today? No one. I'm simply recounting. You're recounting memories from 40 years ago with suspicious specificity about supposed irregularities, while forgetting convenient facts like Margaret Worth's subsequent property purchases. Interesting selective memory. Wesley objected again, and the judge sustained it this time, but the damage was done. Pritchard's testimony had been shaken, and the courtroom buzz suggested people had noticed. The hearing stretched through the afternoon. Hale's lawyers produced more documents, more witnesses. Bennett countered each one, picking apart inconsistencies, highlighting gaps in logic. It became a war of attrition, each side trying to accumulate enough doubt to tip the scales. Finally, Judge Carmichael called for closing arguments. Wesley went first, summarizing their case with polished confidence. Your Honor, the preponderance of evidence suggests the original transfer was improper. Without clear documentation, the claim cannot stand. We ask that you rule in favor of Mr. Hale. Then Bennett stood. He was tired, ink-stained, but his voice rang clear. Your Honor, Mr. Wesley wants you to believe that 40 years of legitimate occupation, tax payments, and community recognition count for nothing because some documents burned in a fire 2 decades ago. He wants you to ignore the accumulated weight of a family's work and life because a man with money and lawyers decided he wants their land. That's not justice. That's robbery dressed up in legal language. He gestured to Cole. The Maddox family has done everything the law requires. They've improved the land, paid every fee, been upstanding members of this territory. To strip them of their property based on manufactured doubt would set a precedent that threatens every landowner who lost records in that fire. It would say that money and lawyers matter more than honest work and legitimate ownership. I don't believe that's the ruling this court wants to make. Judge Carmichael was silent for a long moment. I'll render my decision in 1 hour. Court is in recess. The wait was agony. They gathered outside, nobody quite able to meet anyone else's eyes. Cole paced like a caged animal. Thomas sat on the courthouse steps, head in his hands. Abigail stood apart, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, trying to prepare herself for either outcome. She felt Cole approach before he spoke. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "you fought harder than I had any right to expect. Thank you. We're not done yet." "I know, but just in case it—" He trailed off, seemed to struggle for words. "When this started, I thought I was making a practical arrangement, a solution to problems. I didn't expect—" He stopped again, frustrated. "I'm not good with words, Abigail, but I need you to know that this, us, it became real for me. Somewhere along the way, you stopped being a convenience and became—" He gestured helplessly. "Everything," Abigail finished softly. "I know. It happened to me too." They stood there as the light faded, not touching but connected in ways that had nothing to do with their marriage certificate or legal documents. Whatever the judge decided, this was real. They were real. The bailiff appeared. "Court's reconvening." They filed back inside. Judge Carmichael looked grave as he surveyed the packed courtroom. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority. "I've reviewed all testimony and evidence presented today. This is a complex case with legitimate arguments on both sides. However, the law is clear on certain points." Abigail's heart hammered. Beside her, Cole had gone completely still. "The petitioner has failed to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the original land transfer was fraudulent. While documentation is incomplete due to the fire of 1877, the accumulated evidence of legitimate occupation, community testimony, and circumstantial evidence regarding Margaret Worth's financial activities in the period in question all support the Maddox family's claim. Furthermore, I find Mr. Pritchard's testimony insufficiently credible to overcome 40 years of uncontested ownership." Abigail felt the words sink in, not quite daring to believe. "Therefore, I rule in favor of the defendant. The Maddox land claim is legitimate and legally sound. Mr. Hale's petition is denied." The courtroom erupted. Their witnesses cheered. Hale's face went dark with rage. Bennett was grinning, shaking Cole's hand. Thomas let out a whoop that echoed off the high ceiling. Abigail just stood there, the reality slowly penetrating. They'd won. They'd actually won. Cole turned to her, and without thinking, without the usual caution and distance, they moved toward each other. The embrace was fierce, desperate, celebratory. Abigail felt his heart hammering against hers, felt his good arm tight around her, and realized she was crying. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it. You did it. This was all you. No, we did it together." They pulled apart finally, aware of the crowd around them, the congratulations and handshakes. But Abigail kept catching Cole's eyes across the chaos, and what she saw there made her chest tight with something that felt dangerously close to hope. Outside, Hale intercepted them on the courthouse steps. His face was controlled now, the rage locked behind a mask of civility. "Congratulations, Maddox. You won this round." "This round? There won't be another round, Hale. The court ruled. It's over." "Is it?" Hale's smile was cold. "The law is one thing. What happens on isolated ranches in the middle of winter is another. Accidents happen, fires start, people disappear." The threat was clear. Cole started forward, rage transforming his features, but Abigail grabbed his arm. "Are you threatening us, Mr. Hale?" She kept her voice loud enough to carry, aware of witnesses on the steps around them. "Because that sounds remarkably like a threat. In front of a courthouse, with a judge still inside. How remarkably stupid of you." Hale's eyes narrowed. "I'm simply observing that the frontier is a dangerous place, Mrs. Maddox. All sorts of unfortunate things happen to people who don't know when they've made powerful enemies. Then it's fortunate we have powerful friends." Bennett appeared beside them, his lawyer's instincts sensing trouble, and a legal system that takes threats against property owners seriously. I'm sure Judge Carmichael would be interested to hear about this conversation. For a moment, tension crackled. Then Hale's mask slipped back into place. "Of course, I meant nothing by it. Simply frontier wisdom." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Enjoy your victory, Maddox. I'm sure it will keep you warm through the long winter nights." He left, his lawyers trailing behind like well-dressed shadows. Cole was shaking with suppressed rage. "I should have hit him. You should have done exactly what you did," Abigail said firmly. He wanted you to attack him, wanted an excuse to have you arrested, to undermine the court's decision. We won legally. That's what matters. He's not going to stop. You heard him. I heard a desperate man making empty threats because the law didn't go his way. But privately, Abigail wondered. Men like Hale didn't accept defeat gracefully. They found other ways to win. The ride home was celebratory despite the undercurrent of tension. Their witnesses dispersed with promises to visit, to stay in touch. Bennett rode with them part way, reviewing the case and looking satisfied. I'll file the final paperwork tomorrow. Once it's officially recorded, Hale would need to start a whole new challenge to threaten your ownership again. And after today's ruling, no judge in the territory would hear such a case. Unless he finds a judge he owns, Cole said grimly. Even corrupt judges have to maintain appearances. Today's ruling was sound, well-reasoned. It would take extraordinary circumstances to overturn it. Bennett pulled his horse to a stop at the fork in the road. Go home. Celebrate. You earned this. They continued on, the three of them, Abigail, Cole, and Thomas, as the sun set and stars began appearing in the vast winter sky. The ranch appeared in the distance, the repaired barn solid against the horizon, smoke rising from the chimney where they'd left the fire banked. Home. Abigail tested the word in her mind. When had this place become home? When had these people become family? She couldn't pinpoint the moment. It had just happened, gradually, and then suddenly, the way all important changes seem to work. Inside, Thomas immediately began making dinner, talking excitedly about the hearing, reliving key moments. Cole disappeared into his study, and Abigail followed, finding him standing at his desk, staring at the maps that had consumed so many hours. Hey, she said softly. You all right? Just processing. I thought I'd feel different, victorious. Instead, I just feel... He trailed off. Tired. And worried about what Hale does next. We'll handle whatever comes, together. Cole turned to face her. I keep saying that word. Together. Like I'm trying to convince myself it's real. It is real. Abigail moved closer. Cole, what we've built these past weeks, the partnership, the trust, the... She hesitated, then pushed forward. The feelings. That's all real. Whatever this marriage started as, it's become something else. What has it become? I don't know. Something I'm afraid to name because naming it might make it disappear. Or naming it might make it real. Cole reached out, his good hand cupping her face. I love you, there. I named it. And you're still here. The words hit Abigail like a physical force. She'd known they were coming. She'd felt them building between them for days. But hearing them out loud still stole her breath. I love you too, she whispered. I fought it. Told myself it was just proximity, just circumstances. But it's real. Terrifyingly real. Why terrifying? Because I could lose it, lose you. And I don't know if I'd survive that. Cole pulled her closer, and this time when they came together, it wasn't celebration or relief. It was claim and promise and everything they'd been holding back since that first awkward meeting in the schoolhouse. The kiss was tentative at first, testing boundaries, seeking permission. Then it deepened, became something desperate and necessary. Abigail felt years of carefully maintained distance dissolve, felt herself opening to possibilities she'd thought were dead. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. I know I'm not what you dreamed of when you were young, he said roughly. I'm rough and angry and broken in ways I don't know how to fix, but I'm yours if you want me, completely yours. I stopped believing in dreams a long time ago, Abigail said. But maybe real is better than dreams anyway. Maybe building something real, flawed people working through flawed circumstances. Maybe that matters more than perfect fairy tales. Is that what we are? Flawed people building something real? I think so, and I think that's enough. They stood there, wrapped in each other, and Abigail felt something she hadn't felt in 7 years, hope for the future. Not blind optimism, but the grounded hope that came from knowing you weren't alone, that someone would stand beside you when things got hard. Thomas's voice floated up from the kitchen. Dinner's ready, and it's actually edible this time. They broke apart laughing, some of the intensity releasing. Cole kept hold of Abigail's hand as they descended the stairs, that simple connection feeling more significant than any grand gesture. Dinner was cheerful, Thomas's excitement infectious. They talked about the hearing, about Bennett's brilliant cross-examination, about Judge Carmichael's stern face when he delivered the ruling. They were building a story together, the kind families told at gatherings, turning experience into shared memory. After Thomas went to bed, Abigail and Cole lingered at the table, neither quite ready for the day to end. "What happens now?" Abigail asked. "With Hale, I mean." "I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe he accepts defeat and moves on to easier targets." Cole didn't sound convinced. "Or maybe he escalates, uses methods the courts can't touch. Then we stay vigilant, keep witnesses close, document everything, make sure we're never vulnerable." She paused. "And we live our lives. We don't let fear paralyze us." "When did you get so brave?" "I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being afraid." Abigail stood, began clearing dishes. 7 years I spent being afraid, of making mistakes, of trusting wrong people, of wanting too much. I'm done with that. Whatever comes, we face it head on. Cole helped her with the dishes, the domestic routine feeling comfortable now instead of awkward. When they finished, he caught her hand. "Come with me. I want to show you something." He led her outside into the cold night. The stars were brilliant, undimmed by any artificial light, stretching across the sky in sheets of silver. Cole pointed toward the northern horizon. "See that ridge? That's the edge of our property. Our land. When I was a boy, my father used to bring me out here and tell me about responsibility, about how this land wasn't just ours. It was borrowed from the future. Our job was to take care of it, improve it, pass it on better than we found it. That's a heavy burden for a child." It was. But it was also a gift. It gave me purpose, identity. Without this land, I don't know who I'd be. He turned to her. "And now it's ours. Not just mine anymore. Ours to protect and improve and pass on." "To pass on to who?" Cole's hand moved to her stomach, hesitated there. "Maybe to whoever comes next. If you want that. If..." He stopped, suddenly uncertain. "Do you want that? Children, family, all of it?" Abigail covered his hand with hers, pressing it more firmly against her belly. "I want it. I want all of it. A real marriage, a real family. Everything we pretended this wasn't when we started. Then that's what we'll build, starting tonight." They went back inside, and this time when Cole led her upstairs, it was to his room, not hers. The careful boundaries they'd maintained since the wedding dissolved as they came together with honesty instead of pretense, building something real in the darkness. Later, wrapped in each other, Abigail traced the scar across Cole's eyebrow. "How did you get this?" "Bar fight when I was 19. Stupid kid proving he was tough." "Were you tough?" "I thought so. Really, I was just angry and lost." He caught her hand, kissed her palm. "Took me a long time to figure out that strength isn't about fighting everything. It's about knowing when to stand firm and when to let someone else help carry the weight." "Took me a long time to learn that too. Maybe we're both slow learners. Or maybe we just needed the right teacher." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, years of loneliness finally broken. The next weeks passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal. Thomas returned to his studies with renewed focus. The barn was fully repaired. Abigail continued teaching, her students fascinated by Miss Cross becoming Mrs. Maddox, by the story of the courtroom battle that everyone in town was retelling. And at home, Abigail and Cole built their life together. They learned each other's habits, preferences, triggers. They argued occasionally, Cole's stubbornness clashing with Abigail's need for control, but they learned to work through conflicts instead of retreating into silence. They also learned joy. Simple things like sitting by the fire reading together, like Cole teaching Abigail to ride better, like shared laughter when Thomas burned dinner spectacularly. The moments accumulated, building a foundation stronger than any legal document. A month after the hearing, Marcus Bennett visited with news. Victor Hale is leaving the territory, selling his holdings, moving his operations to Montana. Apparently, the territorial governor started asking uncomfortable questions about his business practices after your case. Sometimes winning in court has ripple effects. "He's really leaving?" Cole sounded skeptical. "His main holdings are already sold. He'll be gone by spring." Bennett smiled. "You won, Cole. Not just the case. You beat him." After Bennett left, Cole stood on the porch staring out at his land, their land, as if seeing it fresh. "It's really over," he said wonderingly. The fight I've been waging for 5 years, it's actually over. And now you get to figure out who you are when you're not fighting. Abigail joined him, slipping her hand into his. That might be harder than the battle was. I'm a rancher, a husband, maybe someday a father. That seems like enough, more than enough. She pressed a hand to her stomach, where a secret had been growing for the past 3 weeks. She hadn't told Cole yet, wanting to be certain. But now, with winter easing and spring approaching and their future finally secure, it felt like the right time. Cole? Yeah? Remember when you said something about passing the land on to whoever comes next? He turned to her, and she watched understanding dawn in his eyes. Abigail, are you? Probably. It's early yet, but the signs are there. She held his gaze. Are you happy about it? Instead of answering with words, Cole lifted her off her feet, spinning her once before setting her down carefully, as if she might break. His smile was incandescent. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Terrified, thrilled, grateful, all of it at once. That's how I feel too, like we're standing at the edge of something huge. We are. But we'll face it the same way we faced everything else. Together. That word again. Together. It had become their promise, their anchor, the thing that made everything else possible. Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting to reveal the land underneath. Brown grass that would green with warmth, fields ready for planting, the whole ranch poised for renewal. Abigail stood at the window one morning, watching the world transform, and thought about how much had changed since that day Cole first walked into her schoolhouse. She'd been so certain of her loneliness then, so convinced that independence meant solitude. It had taken a practical arrangement, a marriage of convenience, to teach her that the strongest independence came from knowing you had someone to depend on. That real strength wasn't about standing alone. It was about choosing who to stand beside. Behind her, she heard Cole moving around, Thomas's voice raised in some joke, the sounds of her family starting their day. Her family. The word still felt new, precious. She thought about the woman she'd been 7 years ago, heartbroken and running from disappointment. That woman had believed love was a fairy tale, that practical choices were the only safe ones. She'd been wrong. Or maybe she'd been right at the time, and it had taken years of living to learn that practical choices could become love stories if you let them. Abigail? Cole appeared beside her, slipping an arm around her expanding waist. What are you thinking about? Survival, she said. How you said this marriage was about survival, and I thought that sounded cold. But I understand now. Sometimes survival is the bravest thing we can do. Sometimes just choosing to keep going, to build something in the face of uncertainty, that's the real victory. Deep thoughts for before breakfast. I'm a teacher. Deep thoughts are part of the job. She leaned into him, feeling safe and grounded and home. Did I ever tell you what I wrote in my journal the night before we got married? No. I wrote that I was tired of measuring my life in careful choices and safe decisions, that I'd rather risk different than guarantee more of the same. She turned to face him. I'm glad I took that risk, even if it terrified me, even if I didn't know how it would turn out. How did it turn out? Better than I deserved, better than I dared hope. She kissed him softly. I got everything I needed, and some things I didn't even know I wanted. A home, a family, a partner who sees me as I am and chooses me anyway. That goes both ways. You took a broken, angry man and made him believe in futures again. That's no small thing. They stood there as morning light filled the kitchen, wrapped in each other, and the quiet certainty of things built to last. Outside, the land stretched away to distant horizons. Their land, their legacy, their future. Inside, life was beginning again in all its messy, complicated, beautiful reality. Thomas burst into the kitchen. Are we eating breakfast or just standing around being romantic? Because I'm starving, and Uncle Cole promised to teach me fence repair today. They broke apart laughing, the moment dissolving into the practical demands of daily life. But as Abigail moved to start breakfast, as Cole teased his nephew about endless appetite, as the house filled with voices and warmth and the chaotic music of family, she felt a contentment so profound it almost hurt. This was what survival looked like, she realized. Not just enduring, but thriving. Not just getting through winter, but planting seeds for spring. Not just protecting what you had, but building toward what you could become. She'd come to Wyoming territory running from disappointment, convinced that independence meant solitude, that safety lay in careful distance. Instead, she'd found that the bravest thing you could do was open yourself to possibility. Let someone see you, flaws and fears and all. Choose partnership over protection. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, that choice led not to the disappointment you feared, but to something real and lasting. Something worth fighting for. Something that started as survival and became, against all odds and expectations, love. Outside, spring was breaking across the plains, turning the world green with promise. Inside, Abigail Maddox stood in her kitchen making breakfast for her family, one hand on her growing belly, her heart fuller than she'd ever imagined possible. She'd stopped looking for fairy tales. Instead, she'd found something better, a flawed, honest, real life built on choice and trust, and the daily courage of showing up for each other. That was the story worth telling. That was the victory that mattered. Not perfect, not smooth, but absolutely, undeniably real. And in the end, that made all the difference.